Natural daylight has appeared. Can we get through an entire TBR before it disappears? Your guess is as good as mine. Hi-de-ho, let's go. It's Leanne and welcome to another video. Or more specifically, welcome to the first TBR of 2024. I still don't entirely know how we got here. Like, I understand the linear timeline of how we got here, but my entire body is still hanging about in the limbo stage between Christmas and New Year. As you can see by the fact that the massive Christmas tree storage bag is on the floor, the lights are off, and the tinsel has well and truly given up the ghost. Which I really hope that I don't do by the end of this video. Because you see, January is the very first month of my bingo board from hell 2024. I'm a scooch over because she take up a bit of space. If you're new here, then check out this video up here, the link down in my description below, to go and see the unveiling of my bingo board, where I explain all of the rules for my bingo board from hell, and I also give you guys several different copies of it so that you can also play along at home. That's right, I thought it was about time that I spread the pain around. What I mean to say there is this is a case of be careful what you wish for, but it may come true. But not only is it the first TBR which I will be using my bingo board for, but because I am who I am as a person, January just wasn't spicy enough. A whole new bingo board, all of my best, worst and stats videos to organise, and the endless weird western pressure to make goals during the winter time when our bodies literally just want to, you know, lie down on something soft for a couple of months. All of those things just weren't enough. So I had to crank up the pressure just a little bit for myself, you know, to get those motors running for the start of the year. So not only will my bingo board be helping to dictate my January TBR, but so will my patrons, or rather so have my patrons. Because the choices have been made, my friends. That horse has bolted. During the month of December, we had Poll Week over in Lochfern, which is the tiny, slightly haunted Scottish town that is my Patreon, in which we had a poll every single day for every square on my bingo board, except of course for read 60% of my 2024 purchases, because I have not yet made any 2024 purchases, so I cannot exactly read them. So for each of these squares, I gave my patrons a choice of 5 books that were on my TBR, and I let them go to town. To be fair, my patrons usually fall into one of two categories, which is torture me endlessly or treat me more nicely than I would necessarily treat myself. But I have no idea which side of the fence these polls are going to fall on, because genuinely chances are it could be either. I made sure that I picked a mixture of books that I really wanted and also books that I really didn't want, because the point of my bingo board for 2024 is to try and get through my backlist. It's to try and finish series, to stop putting off rainy day books. And so although all of these books are books that I deep down do want to read, there's definitely, you know, a sliding scale of which one of those I would like to read more. So normally I would start out with the books for my bingo board, but as I don't actually know what they are yet, let me get all of the other books out of the way. Because although I have picked one book for every single square on this bingo board, I do have other commitments in January. And the first of those commitments is a secret project. Well, I mean, I say it's a secret project. You guys are going to know about it at the start of next week when the video goes up. I have already pre-filmed it before all of my Christmas decorations started falling apart. So it's not going to be a secret project for very long. So what I will say is that I have one book for the start of a rather long read along that I have to pick up between January and February. So in short, I have to pick up that mysterious book. However, on the subject of very long read-alongs, if you are taking part in Around the Disc in 800 Days, which is myself and my lovely friend Kirsty's complete Discworld read-along, we started last year in January and I cannot believe that we are already halfway through. If you are taking part in Around the Disc, then you will be pleased to know that January is a rest month for us. We will be picking up again in February, so if you are a couple of books behind or you skipped a book along the timeline, or even if you've been thinking about jumping into the second half of this readathon, then you can do all of those things this month, and I will leave you a link for the Discord down below. So please don't feel intimidated because it's year 2. Come and join us if it's something that you think would be up your alley, although I don't think any of us should be frequenting any alleys in Ankh-Morport. So yes, no Around the Disc in January for me, which is definitely going to be playing into my grubby little hands, because I have a feeling there are going to be some longer books on this TBR. And speaking of longer books, we have some fresh January-February picks for the Seance Society, which is my Patreon bi-monthly book club. Across January and February, we are going to be reading 2 very different books. The first one of those is The Historian by Elizabeth Kostova. I picked this up in the second half of last year, I think, at the urging of my lovely friend Jill, who was like, this is very up your alley. This not only has a kind of dark academia aesthetic going on, but it is in fact a classic horror retelling, which is something that I completely adore, because this is a Dracula retelling. Hi! Do you also want to read the Dracula retelling? Yeah, you also like scary things with fangs. So this one is set in the 70s, and we are following a 16-year-old girl who has gone into her late father's library. She goes there looking for the secrets of her father's past, and instead what she finds is a yellowed sheaf of letters which are addressed to my unfortunate successor. These letters then take her on a treasure trail across Europe, chasing the legend of Dracula, which is not so much a legend in this world, but a reality. That is both so little to know about a premise and such a big premise to pitch to me. I cannot tell you how excited I am that we're going to be reading this for book club. As soon as it won, I ran and shoved a bookmark in it. But as soon as I shoved that bookmark in it, I did discover that this is like 700 pages long on Bible thin paper with the smallest font known to man. So I definitely think that I need to pick this one up at the start of the month, because I think this is going to take a little while to get through, even if it does suck me in as much as I hope that it does. No sucking puns intended. The other book that won in our poll, because if you didn't know, my Patreon book club picks 2 books, the top 2 books in the poll, because they are almost always completely different genres. We are a variety book club. We read such a wide range of things, and by picking 2 books, it just means that if there's a genre in there that you absolutely hate, you have the option to read the other book. And the other one is as far from The Historian as it is possible to get, because it is actually a sci-fi space opera. This is not Heck Gloss, or at least I think that is what it is. It's book 1 in the Graven series by Essa Hansen. Let's go with that. And this one is about Caden, whose entire planet has been destroyed and who needs somewhere to go. Caden finds himself on the run and desperately needing somewhere to go, and stumbles over a mysterious ship with a very strange array of aliens on it. And the ship itself seems to have a sentient soul. But while Caden is plotting away in the background, desperate to take revenge on the people who killed his planet, he is unprepared for the idea of found family, which is, as you know, one of my favourite things to read about, especially in fantasy or sci-fi. Also, this one qualifies as hitting a board on my bingo board because it is a TBR veteran. I don't entirely know why, but this one has been on my TBR for more than a year and I have not touched it. It's not exactly a rainy day book. I'm not putting it off for the perfect time. I just kind of keep forgetting that it exists. So I am hoping that it lives up to the hype, because lots of people that I trust really like this one. But we shall see. You know I will report back. And then finally, the Seance Society also finished off their first series read-along at the end of December. We were, as you guys probably know if you've been watching my last few TBRs, reading the Dry series by Jane Harper together. I had read and then subsequently reread the first 2 books, The Dry and Force of Nature, but the last book, Exiles, had been waiting on my shelf for a while, for too long for the conclusion of one of my favourite series ever. It was most definitely a rainy day book, and I did say in my TBR in December that there was a chance that my brain would end up holding this over to January for me to read, and that's kind of exactly what happened, because December's reading was very variable and this one just never made the cut, slash my brain found other ways to procrastinate it. The Seance Society are however starting doing a new series read along. In February we start the Diversions series by Libba Bray. We'll be doing one book each month for that one, so I need to get myself completely caught up before I start to take on another series. Alright, so all of those books that I absolutely have to read out of the way, let's get into the polls. I genuinely am very warm. I'm really kind of terrified, but I am starting to run out of natural light, so I just have to jump in there. Hold my hand. Alright, so the first poll was for my 10 audiobooks square on my bingo board, in which I am going to try to listen to 10 audiobooks in 2024. As I said in my bingo board video, I know that I am going to exceed 10 audiobooks. I am hoping that this is a square that I can complete off multiple times in 2024. So kicking that off, here were the contenders. Here are the books that I gave my patrons to choose from. 3 of these books are starts to new series that I have in both physical format and on audiobook, so I can have a truly immersive reading experience. And the other 2 are audiobooks that have been hanging out in my audiobook library for a really long time untouched. If I'm honest, I think I would like one of these 2 books to win the poll. Gideon is not only a new purchase for the end of 2023, but it's actually a repurchase. It's actually one of the only books that I have unhauled and then been persuaded to give a go again by Becca, who absolutely adored it. The other is a beloved horror, and I am just itching for a good horror series that I can hold on to the characters past one book. So let's see together what book my Patreons have picked for me to start 2024 with. Okay, so with an almost overwhelming 45% of the vote, I will be reading Gideon the Ninth. That one played right into my sweaty little hands, didn't it? Probably indicating that it can only be downhill from here. So considering Gideon the Ninth is a book that I have actually purchased twice in my life, I still don't actually know that much about it. In fact, most people only seem to know going into this book that it is about lesbian necromancers in space. And while you would think that would have been enough to make me not unhaul it the first time around, I ended up getting quite intimidated by this book, because the more I heard people talk about it, the more they were like, it's a confusing plot, you don't really get any answers in the first book, you're never actually told why anybody is doing any of the things that they are doing, and books like that don't usually work for me. In fact, books like that usually make me pretty annoyed. But again, as I said, Becca convinced me to pick this one up again by telling me that it had several energy. And if you are like us, a Red Rising fiend, then that is probably something that is a positive for you. So I will be picking this one up knowing nothing more than that for the synopsis, and hopefully listening along to this audiobook whilst reading the paperback will help me to get through it. Next up is my 10 reread square. While I was assessing my reading last year, I worked out that not only am I not prioritising the new books that are coming in, but I'm not actually prioritising rereading any of the books that I absolutely love in my library, which is something that I used to do really regularly. And over the last 2 years, I've allowed myself to read a book that I absolutely love near the start of the year and reread it again near the end of the year. And the reading experience of those books was just so good that it really pointed out to me that rereading needed to be a bit more of a priority for me. So here are the choices that I gave my Patreon for my reread category. I think the 2 that I would like to read the most out of this is Pawn of Prophecy by David Eddings, because that is actually a 10 book high fantasy series that I haven't reread in a lot of years, but it was my gateway into fantasy, and although a lot of it is very cliche now because it was 80s fantasy, I still absolutely adore those characters and I love that world. And the other thing that I think I would really like to win is Bastard Out of Carolina by Dorothy Allison. This is a modern classic set in the American South that I read quite a few years ago now, but it has really never left my brain since then. But I do need a push to reread it because it is really sad. And honestly, there are a couple of triggery things in there that I don't know how present day me will handle. So with all of that said, let's see what my patrons chose for me. Oh, that percentage is even bigger than the other one. With 54% of the vote, I will be rereading Illuminate. Now look guys, am I sad about this? No. Illuminate is one of my favourite series ever in the whole world. I love reading them physically, I love listening to them on audiobook, I love doing both in tandem, and I have done all of those things multiple times. Illuminate is like a great big hug for me, which is actually a little bit twisted considering how many people die in that series. And so I think the results of this poll are both indicative of the fact that my patrons know me really well and they know how much I like that series, and also I think think indicative of the fact that lots of them probably love it too. So in case you haven't heard of the Illuminate files before, although I think you would have to have been living under rather a large space rock, this is a young adult sci-fi horror trilogy written by Amy Kaufman and Jay Kristoff, and it is, in my not so humble opinion, both of their finest works. At the beginning of Illuminate, we start out in a small mining colony which is completely illegal. But even though it's illegal, it really is kind of beneath the notice of the big corporations who run the mining things in this galaxy, until it isn't, until one day one of those mining corporations sends a kill squad there and completely wipes out the colony. Two ships come to the emergency aid call for this, and both of our protagonists, who are in the middle of breaking up with each other when this strike happens, end up on two totally different ships and can only communicate through essentially instant messenger. We then follow them in a literal timed race across space to get to somewhere safe before this fleet finds them, all the while trying to work out why anybody would try to wipe out their tiny colony, and dealing with the fact that something is very strange aboard one of these vessels. Just talking about this series gives me the happy brain tingles, so I'm kind of really gleeful at this one, even though it's a little bit naughty, because realistically I am now committing to picking up the 3 books and tiny novella that make up this series, even though it will take me roughly 42 seconds to get through them all because love them that much. Just want to squish them in my eye holes and keep them there forever. Next up, we have my 10 series tracker books square. If you are new here, then you might not know, but last year I took you guys through a whirlwind tour of my series tracker spreadsheet, and we discovered that I was reading 92 separate series. So throughout that video, we updated that spreadsheet, we got rid of a bunch of series that I really should have DNF'd a long time ago and unhauled, and we moved other series up to the top of my priority list. We will be repeating that video at the end of this month, updating all of the series that I have made progress on in 2023 and adding some of the new series that I started in 2023 and haven't finished. So hold on to your hats for that one, because I have a lot of dread in my life for it. So here are the list of books that I gave my patrons an option to pick from. Now you will notice that 2 of these books are starred, and that is because if I was to jump back into these series, I would probably have to reread the first books in it in order to know what is going on from this point. And in both cases it's because I started those series a really long time ago and just never carried on with them, even though I really want to. The other books on this poll are either books that I read the first book of in 2023, or in the case of Days of Blood and Starlight, it is a series that I was trying to finish in 2023 and got stalled halfway through the second book off. Please cross fingers that they have been kind with this one. Oh, okay, so they have been kind with this one. With 38% of the vote, they have chosen Hellbent. This is the second book in the Alex Stern series by Leigh Bardugo. It is a dark academia series, and it is in fact one of the books that I talked about earlier on when I said that I have in fact read it twice in the year that I read it for the first time in, because I enjoyed it so much and I just decided that I wanted to, that I should let myself do that. And my patrons absolutely know how much I like this series, so I do think that they were probably trying to be kind by picking this one. And in a way they definitely have been, because not only do I get to read a most anticipated book that I put off last year for no discernible reason, but also these are the only 2 books that are currently out in this series, so I will effectively have completed this series off as much as I can, and that will get it off of my series tracker spreadsheet. So actually that one is kind of a win, even though it does mean that the Daughter of Smoke and Bone trilogy is still unfinished. Next up we have my TBR veterans books that have been hanging around on my bookcase for a really long time. Now I'm not gonna lie, for my TBR veteran square I made a big spreadsheet and I put all of the books in there that had been hanging around on my shelves for more than a year without being touched. I made sure that I had 5 completely different genres on there for my patrons to choose from, but I really wasn't that selective about which titles ended up on this list, because realistically I've put them all off for some reason or other. So without any preamble at all this time, let's see what my patrons chose from that poll. Oh, okay, so that one was really, really close. So with 35% of the vote, we have got Witch Bottle by Thomas Fletcher, which is a horror. So with 32% of the vote, we almost had another series book. We almost had Blood Trials, which is the start of a sci-fi duology. So that's interesting. I wonder whether my patrons were split between people who were like, get Leanne to finish all the series, that is what she needs to do, and another half of people who were like, give her a break, no more series books. This one's a really interesting premise. It's about Daniel, who's had a lot of really crappy things happen to him in his life. He had a younger brother who died, and he is now lost through various circumstances his wife and a child. I don't know whether they've left or they have died. But either way, he is alone, and he kind of prefers it that way now after everything that's happened to him. By day he has his job as a milkman, and by night he keeps to himself. Except he started to have horrible nightmares, and they're not just nightmares, because some of these very weird things have actually started to happen to people around him. And so Daniel, absolutely convinced that he is cursed, approaches a local witch who promises that she will give him a protective spell. She will give him a witch bottle. But in return, Daniel has to deliver some of the things that the witch makes on his rounds as a milkman. The tagline of this one then says, "But not everyone's happy to find people meddling with witch bottles. Things are about to get very unpleasant." So I don't know whether this is going to be like a small town turns on a person thing, or like a is it supernatural or is it not thing, but either way, I'm in. Now next up we have one of my favourite squares. It is my 10 Rainy Day Books square. Don't get me wrong, I say it's my favourite square. It's also one of my most intimidating squares. The books that I have as rainy day books are rainy day books for a reason, but I am delighted to actually have something to push me to read some of these rainy day books, because they're rainy day books because they are essentially 5-star predictions. And if nobody forces me to pick them up, then they could just stay there on my shelves forever until I eventually get too intimidated to read them, and then I will unhaul them. Yeah, it's a weird, strange whirlpool up here, kids. So these are the choices that I gave my patrons, and these are very different from some of the other choices on this list. One of these books is a book that I picked up at the end of 2023, so technically it hasn't been a rainy day book for that long, but I know for a fact, because of my experience with another similar book on my shelves, that I will put this one off and off and off and off and off if given the opportunity. One of these books was a most anticipated book when it came out in 2023, and I did not touch it. One of these books was a completely blind pick from Waterstone. I saw it on a table, I picked it up immediately, I put it on my shelves, I never touched it. One of these books is a book that everybody tells me I'm going to absolutely adore, and one of these books is a second book by an author that has written one of my favourite books of all time. So they are a very wide variety, and to be perfectly honest, I don't care which one wins this poll, because I really honestly think I'm gonna adore every single one of them. So without further ado, let's see what my patrons decided on. Oh, I did not expect that at all. Okay, so with 30% of the vote, we nearly had The Scandalous Confessions of Lydia Bennet Witch. Now, my patrons have heard me rave about this one. I was on a sprint with them literally hours after I bought it, and I was so excited that I had found it. So I was fully expecting them to pick that on the premise that they knew how badly I wanted to read it. But they have not. They have instead picked The City We Became by N.K. Jemisin. I have actually picked up several of N.K. Jemisin's books, and not a single one has worked for me. I have ended up DNFing all of them. There is absolutely nothing wrong with the plots or the world building in her books, but I feel really held at like arm's length from all of her characters, and I don't like the tone that her books are written in. They just aren't immersive to me. They continually remind me that I am reading a book. And so without knowing it, my patrons have also actually picked my last try ever with N.K. Jemisin. If this book doesn't work for me, I'm not going to be picking up any of her other novels, because I think I have given it the good college try. Now, the reason that everybody says that I should read this one is because the premise is kind of similar to some of the things in Rivers of London by Ben Aronovich, which is a series that I've talked about a lot on this channel. It's a series that I absolutely adored up till about book 8. It is a series that I also DNF'd in 2023 for various different reasons, but the first like early books in that series hold a really safe place as my favourite books in my heart. And that similar premise is to do with inanimate things or concepts of things having souls. So in the Rivers of London series, the rivers themselves have souls. The Thames has a soul, and those souls create entities who have been alive for a really, really long time. And in N.K. Jemisin's The City We Became, cities themselves actually have souls. And in the case of this one, which is set in New York, each of the different boroughs have different souls and are represented by different characters. Lots and lots of people absolutely adore the characters in these books, and that premise really does sound right up my alley. I love the idea of sentience in houses and cities and rivers, so I am crossing my fingers that this breaks my losing streak with N.K. Jemisin. Next up, we have my Read 10 non-fiction books. This one is another repeat from my 2023 board that I think I'm probably going to get through multiple times in 2024, and the list of books that I gave my patrons for this one were also kind of all over the shop. There are a couple of true crime books on there that I also picked up right at the end of 2023 which have completely different premises. There are 2 memoirs on there, one about mental health and one about adoption, and then finally there is a non-fiction by, I believe, a journalist about domestic abuse, and also I think about the early formation of the idea of coercive control, because this one's a couple of years older now. And again, I don't really mind what wins for my patrons for this one. Every single title on there is a title that I'm quite invested in getting to in 2024, so I think I will make my way through this list with or without this poll. So let's have a look at the poll results. Oh, this one was really close between quite a few books as well, but the winner of this one with 27% of the vote is No Visible Bruises. So this one is the non-fiction book about domestic abuse. I just very recently read In Control, which is another book about coercive control and about the formation of a way for us to legally recognise that. And that one was absolutely fascinating. I really, really recommend picking that one up. But it made me remember that I had this book on my bookshelves. This one is kind of a TBR veteran as well. It's been there for a few years and I haven't picked it up. And that is also because this one has the tiniest writing I have ever seen in my life. It's printed by a standard publisher, but it's published in a very strange way. So I might end up having to pick up the audiobook for this one to read along with it, because I had no idea how tiny the font was when I picked it up. So that's my non-fiction pick. Next up, we have one that I'm very, very excited for. It is my Random Emoji Reads Square. So the way that this one is going to work is that I am going to in some way pick a random emoji and choose a book based on that in 2024. One that doesn't have a target on it, so it's not my like read 10 books or read a percentage of my books. It's just read as many of these as I feel like reading in the year, which is kind of like mood reading, which is kind of why it's there. And I really do plan on using all different ways to pick an emoji for this one. But for January, I used a random emoji generator to give me the emojis that I was going to give to my patrons. So we ended up with time, the astrological sign for Leo, whale, hug and a taxi. Now, I only have one book that I know for sure would fit these emojis, and that is Witch King by Martha Wells. And the only reason that I know that this will fit the whale emoji is because when I got this special edition, it came with a bookmark which had a whale on it, and I know that a lot of this world is set around water, so I can only assume that there are whales in this book. However, that is the emoji that I want to win the absolute least. I do not want to read this book this month. I just have no desire to pick it up right now. And I don't know whether that's because I'm not in the mood for it or whether I've just decided that I don't want to read it after all. The reviews for it have been very, very mixed and I just don't know. So let's put me out of my misery and see what my patrons have chosen. Oh, Whale nearly won. Whale had 26% of the vote. It nearly won. But with 29% of the vote, the hug emoji won. Now, the hug emoji makes me think about books that make me feel like I'm being hugged. By that I mean books by favourite authors or books set in favourite worlds, which actually might be a good thing given how much death and destruction is on the rest of this TBR so far. So let's see what I can find. Okay, I have got one. This is one that was waiting on my new books cart to be in a haul at the end of this month, but that book is A Stroke of the Pen, The Lost Stories by Terry Pratchett. Maybe it is just that I'm missing reading a Discworld book this month. Maybe it just feels normal now to always be reading a Terry Pratchett. So I will fill in the gap in the Around the Disc readathon as well as in my bingo board with this one. This is a collection of stories from Terry Pratchett that were gathered up from newspapers and magazines, which is where he published in the early 80s. One of them is actually set in a very, very early version of Ankh-Morpork, but the other ones are completely random. There's one in here about time travel, there's one in here about cavemen. Definitely from the synopsis of this one, it sounds like there are some themes in here that really give you a sense of what Terry wanted to go on and play with long term in the Discworld. Lovely spouse Harry got this for me for my Christmas, so I'm very excited to get into it. And this is the Waterstones exclusive edition. So it has these special end papers and it also has this foiling on the cover. And from the sticker that I got rid of on the cover, apparently I understand that there are also some doodles in here from Terry himself. So this will be a nice quick read, I think. And now for the very last square on my bingo board that we can choose things for, I have got my BFF Controls square. So when Kirsty came and visited me at the end of last year, she literally went through my library, grabbed my notebook and wrote down a bunch of books that she said I had to read immediately. And knowing that Kirsty and I's version of immediately are very different and mine is very elastic, I thought that it was probably a good idea to actually make a square on my bingo board, which forced me to get through that list. But also, if I end up finding books on that list that I'm just not in the mood for right now, Kirsty gives me recommendations on a daily basis, so she will still be in control of me, which is actually probably a really good thing because I shouldn't be in control of me, I don't think. So for this one, I picked both a really wide range of variety in the genres for my patrons, but I also picked a really wide range of how long these books have been on my shelf, because there are several of these books that have been on my shelf and in my Kindle for a really, really, really long time that Kirsty made me buy ages ago and that I have never picked up. And I am both really interested and absolutely terrified to see what my patrons have picked, because I have a strong suspicion that I know what is at the top of this poll and that I ain't going to be happy about it. Oh, what a bunch of ass hats. With 34% of the vote, we have got Pachinko by Min Jin Lee. This is exactly the one that I knew they were going to pick. It is exactly the one that I was not happy that they were going to pick. And it's not because I don't want to read this book ever, like it's not become a rainy day book. Although realistically, it could become a rainy day book if it sits for long enough. This one is fairly new to my library. I picked it up while I was away with Kirsty. She shoved it into my hand and was like, "You would love this, you should read it." But Pachinko is many, many, many pages long, and it is a multiple generation historical fiction saga, none of which are words that ever enter my mouth for books that I'm putting on my TBR. And there are quite a few chunky books on this TBR already, so I am not impressed, you guys. I told you right at the start of this video when these polls were going well that they were going too well. Okay, so Pachinko by Min Jin Lee is set in the very early 1900s and it follows Sunja, I think, who is a girl in a very small Korean village who starts dating a boy who is part of the Yakuza. He's like very far above her station, somebody that she never thought that she would ever manage to grab. But when she gets pregnant, he absolutely abandons her and she is left knowing that she will be cast out of her village. And so she does the only thing that she possibly can to save herself and her unborn child, which is to marry a passing missionary, I think. He's either a missionary or a preacher, I can't remember which, but either way he is a kindly man who she thinks will treat her tolerably well, and so she marries him and carries on his mission with him. And we then follow all of these subsequent generations of her family after that. This one also promises to be hella sad. So again, it's probably a good thing that it was picked for this TBR, because otherwise it might have sat on my shelves for quite a long time and not been read. I still don't want to read it this month, and I hate y'all just a little bit. Just a little bit. Just tiny bit, tiny bit. So that is it, guys. That is finally the end of my January 2024 TBR. I say finally the end because that was a mild form of torture for me and it felt like it went on for a really long time. If you've got this far through the video, then leave me a little toadstool emoji for the little gnome on the front of this book. I really hope that you guys have enjoyed watching my patrons pick my TBR for January. If you would like to get involved in future poll weeks, because I will be undoubtedly doing this again later on in the year. Or if you would like to join in with our series read along for the Diviners, or with our book club for the Historian and Note Behet Gloss, then you can head on down to my Patreon and the link down below in my description box. The start of the month is always the best time to join in, and as always, if you have read any of the books that I've mentioned here today and you have loved them, or if you have hated them, then tell me about that down below in the comments, because you know that we like opinions here. And it's a brand new reading year, which means it's a brand new buying year, so if you have any recommendations based on any of the books below that you think that I would love, then please leave those in the comments too. If you're new here and a stats lover, then don't forget to hit subscribe so that you can see all of my end of year stats coming to you in the next couple of weeks. And if you are a returning subscriber, then thank you so much. Here's to another year of watching me be in some form of pain over my books. And if you like that, then don't forget to hit that like button down below, because it really does help my channel. And I will speak to you guys really soon. Bye!